Dear student, today I would like to continue my demonstration, my presentation about the development of the heart. This is the second part of the presentation will be. Here you can see the schedule, and we saw the first 4 main points in the first lecture, and today I would like to continue it with the development of the atria, with the development of the sinus venosus. In the first lecture, we saw the establishment of the cardiogenic field, the formation of the heart tube, we saw the looping of the heart tube, and after we separated from each other the common atrium and the ventricles. So let's see now the development of the sinus venosus. Here you can see the schematic picture from the embryo and of the 4th week. There you can see the heart tube. This is the caudal part, the venous part, and this here you can see the bulbus cordis, and from there will develop the aortic sac with the special pharyngeal arteries. They will communicate with the dorsal aorta, which is located there. You can see very well that the sinus venosus will open the main veins of the embryo. This part is called the sinus horn, and into the sinus horn will open 3 main veins. Of course, in one side, because both of them, they are paired. What are these veins? First, I would like to show you the cardinal veins. We can talk about anterior cardinal vein, which will collect the venous blood from the anterior part, from the cranial part of the embryo. We can talk about posterior cardinal veins from the lower part, from the lower extremities, the lower part of it. And after, they will fuse and they will form the common cardinal vein, which will open to the sinus horn. The second vein is that the umbilical vein, which will bring the blood from the placenta, the oxygenated blood. It has really important function during the embryological life. And finally, from the yolk sac will be the vitelline veins. These veins, they will drain to the sinus horns. Here you can see the schematic picture from the posterior view. So this is the left side, and here you can see the right side, the left sinus horn and the right sinus horn. You see the main veins which will open to the sinus horns, the common cardinal vein, which will be the fusion of the anterior and posterior cardinal vein. This has an author name which is called the ductus Cuvieri. Into this part will open the umbilical veins and the vitelline veins too. First, you can see it very well that the sinus horns, they will have a very huge communication with the sinus venosus, opening to the sinus venosus, to the atrium. This is very huge communication first. But during the development, you will see in the other lecture, which will be about the development of the veins, that the venous system first it is symmetrical, but during the development, this will shunt from the left side to the right side, because there in the right side will develop the superior vena cava and inferior vena cava too. Here you can see this moving too in this picture. We have closures. In the right side, the umbilical vein will be closed, and there in the left side, the proximal part of the umbilical veins and the vitelline vein will disappear too. And here you can see from the left sinus horn we have only just a small smaller structure, which will be the coronary sinus. I will show you later that, but let's see what will be from the right side. Here you see the opening, this white, very huge opening will be smaller, and one part of the sinus horn, this will fuse to the wall of the right atrium. From the vitelline vein, right vitelline vein will be the inferior vena cava, and from the common cardinal vein and the part of the anterior cardinal vein, from this will be the superior vena cava. And this small vein will be here too, the azygous vein, which is the main vein of the thoracic cavity. It will open to the superior vena cava also. And here you can see the communication between the sinus horn with the atrium. So very small communication will be there compared to the first one, and the whole structure will shift from the left side to the right side. Here you can see this picture in an enlarged part. You see that from the left horn of the sinus venosus will be the coronary sinus, and only just a small vein, which is the oblique vein of the left atrium. And from the right horn will be this part. One part will fuse with the right atrium, and this will be the smooth part of the right atrium, which is the sinus venarum cavarum. I hope you remember from the anatomy practice the smooth part of the right atrium, where we have the opening of the superior vena cava, inferior vena cava, and the coronary sinus. If you see this opening from the cavity of the common atrium, there you can see the sinoatrial orifice. The sinoatrial orifice is bordered by two valves. We can talk about the right and the left valve there. The left valve will fuse to the septum spurium and will fuse with the developing interatrial septa, so it will disappear. And if we see the right valve from the upper part of the right valve, it is also disappear. But there you can see that from the lower part of the right valve will develop two other valves, what we saw also in the anatomy practice. One will be the valve of the inferior vena cava. This is the Eustachian valve, and the other will be the valve of the coronary sinus. This was the Tabatian valve. These valves, they have really important function to help in to direct the blood flow towards the oval fossa, oval foramen, what we will describe now, the development of this oval fossa, the communication between the right and the left atrium. It is really important during the embryological life because we have no pulmonary circulation. Here you can see the fusion of these parts towards the right atrium. This is the sinus venarum cavarum, the smooth part of the right atrium. And the other parts will develop from the common atrium. There we have the pectinate muscles. This will form the atrium proper, which is the auricular part of the atrium. The border between the sinus venarum cavarum and the atrium proper or auricle, it is so visible also in this picture. This is the terminal crest, the crista terminalis. This is a crest inside and the sulcus outside. I hope also you know this very well from the anatomy practice. And this is the picture from the movie. There you can see very well the opening of the superior vena cava, inferior vena cava, and the coronary sinus. And you see also that into the common atrium first will drain the pulmonary veins too. So here first we have the common atrium, and the opening of these veins there, but now we have to divide it into right and left side with the interatrial septum. So let's see now the septum formation of the common atrium. This is the next step of the development. We separate from each other the right and the left atria. If we do a section from this stage of the heart development, there you can see a mid-sagittal part, mid-sagittal section, and this is the anterior view. You see very well there. Let's concentrating on the upper part first, and after we will see the separation of the ventricles. You see very well in this picture that all of these procedures, they are parallel to each other. So it's a continuous, so in the same time we divide the right and left atria and the right and left ventricle too. But first I would like to focusing on the separation of the atria. So this is the common atrium, and first there will be here in the upper superior part of the common atrium one protrusion which is called the septum primum. This septum primum will grow towards the atrioventricular canal. Here you can see it will be bigger. And first we have a communication between the right and left atrium. This is the ostium primum. It is always really important that we have to have a communication between the right and the left atrium during the development, because we have no pulmonary circulation. So that's why we need this shunt in the circulation of the embryo. So always we have to have communication between the right and the left side. So during the growing of the different septums, always we have one hole when the blood can go from the right side to the left side of the heart. So there you can see the ostium primum first, but this ostium primum will be closed later because of the growing of the cushions in the atrioventricular canal. So these cushions, they will close this ostium primum, but parallelly, because I told you that we have to have communication between the two parts, we'll develop another ostium, another foramen. So here you can see first the septum primum with the ostium primum, and here we'll develop the ostium secundum. And that's why we have also communication between the right and the left atria. This is the next step, and you can see that the septum primum will fuse with the endocardial cushions of the atrioventricular canal. So we close here the whole cavity, and this is the new opening between the right and the left atrium. Of course, it's no problem if we have a hole during the embryological life, but after the birth we have to close, of course, this foramen. So that's why we have another septum which will originate from the anterior superior part of the ventricle. It will grow and it will cover the septum, it will cover the ostium secundum within the septum primum, but here, there will be another foramen which is called the oval foramen. If you see this picture, it is so visible there that first this is the septum primum, and this is the opening in the septum primum, which was the ostium secundum, and this is the septum secundum, and this is the opening of the septum secundum, which was the oval foramen. So these holes, they do not overlap each other. So that's why the blood has a very special way how it goes between the right and the left atrium. Here you can see that. Why is it important? Because now if we have differences between the pressure of the different cavities, of course the blood in this complicated way, but it can go from the right side to the left side. But after the birth, where we have higher pressure and the two parts, we have not very huge differences between the pressure. These septa, they will fuse and they will close the communication between the two atria. Maybe if we have this, if this fusion is not complete, in this case we can talk about the patent from foramen ovale, but normally we have no communication between the right and the left atrium after the birth, and we can see only just the oval fossa in the interatrial septum in the dissecting room. So let's see this hole in the video, what's happening. If you do a section, you can see the common atrium, the veins, superior vena cava, inferior vena cava, coronary sinus, and the pulmonary veins, which will open to the common atrium first. If we separate it, you can see the common atrium, and first we will start with the development of the septum primum from the superior upper part of it. This will be the ostium primum first, which will be closed by the endocardial cushions of the atrioventricular canal. It's closed, but there will be the other foramen there in the upper part, which is called the ostium secundum. And finally, there will be the septum secundum, which will cover here the ostium secundum, but there will develop another foramen. And this is the way of the blood, how we will have communication between the right and left atrium during the embryological life. If you see this YouTube video at home, of course you can see it again, and you can see it in a slower manner too, but in the presentation, maybe if it in the presentation is so fast, you can see it again at home. Let's see the next point. I told you the development of the sinus venosus and the formation of the common atrium. And now I would like to tell you some words about the malformations, because the embryo questions in the exam is always one question. For example, the development of the atrioventricular septum and its malformations. So that's why I would like to demonstrate for you the malformations of the first steps. It is really important to know that the malformations, the cardiac malformations, the malformation of the development of the heart makes up the largest category of the human birth defects, and 88% genetic factors, 2% environmental agents, and other multifactorial agents could be behind of the developmental malformations. For example, viruses, different medicines, huge amount of vitamin A, alcohol, and diabetes. So unfortunately, we have this is a very huge part of the developmental malformations. The abnormality of the cardiac looping. In the first point, we have to mention the dextrocardia. What does it mean? In this developmental malformation, the heart loops to the opposite side, so that's why the heart will be in the right side of the thoracic cavity. Another complicated form of this is the situs inversus, which means that all of the organs will be in the opposite side. So you can see very well that the heart is located in the right side and the liver is located in the left side. So all of the organs, they are in the opposite side. Let's see now the malformations of the development of the intraatrial septum. Here you see the percentage of it more frequent in females compared to male. What are those? If you see the first, it is the excessive absorption of the septum primum. It means that the foramen ovale is very huge. The foramen ovale apertum, it is the name of this abnormality, where the main part of the septum primum will disappear. So here you have a huge communication between the atria. Also, we have a hole in that when the septum secundum does not develop from the uppermost part. There you can see the ostium secundum, which is the communication between the right and the left atrium. The most severe case of the abnormality of the development of the interatrial septum is that when we have no septum, it is called the trilocular biventricular stage. So we have one common atrium and two ventricles. This is the most severe case when we have no septum at all. And finally, of course, it is also very severe developmental malformation when we have no communication, when the septum will close earlier. In this case, unfortunately, we have no shunt between the right and the left side, and unfortunately, it will lead to the death of the baby. Let's see now the abnormalities of the development of the atrioventricular canal. I told you that here we have endocardial cushions, which will divide the right and the left atrioventricular orifice. And also, they are involved in the formation of the interatrial and the interventricular septum too. So in this case, you can see when the endocardial cushions, they are missing, the ostium primum here, it's not closed. I told you at the beginning that for the closure of the septum primum is necessary the growing of the endocardial cushions. But if we have more complicated developmental malformation, for example there, you can see we have a problem in the separation of the right and the left atrioventricular orifice, and also we have problem with the formation of the interatrial and also in the interventricular septum. This is called the persistent atrioventricular canal, when these cushions, they did not fuse and they did not separate from each other the main parts. The last part of my presentation is the development of the interventricular septum and the division of the conus cordis and the truncus arteriosus with the aorticopulmonary septum, and of course the malformations of these procedures. Let's see that. If we go back to the same picture what I showed you during the development of the atria, here you can see the ventricles there. The primitive left and the primitive right ventricle is visible in the picture. You can see very well that the development of the interventricular septum will start with the formation of the muscular part of the interventricular septum. This procedure is the second type of the separation, when you can see that that part of the wall does not grow, but the other will grow so fast. So that's why here will be formed the septum, the muscular septum between the wall. But as you see, it is growing, but it does not reach the atrioventricular orifice because it's not able to close correctly the two. It is not able to separate correctly the right and the left ventricles from each other. So that's why during the development, here we have a primitive interventricular foramen, and this primitive primary interventricular foramen will be closed by an endocardial cushions which will separate from each other the outflow parts of the ventricles. The lower part of these cushions will close this foramen, and that's why we can divide the interventricular septum into two main parts. We have a lower muscular part and we have another upper membranous part which will be formed by these endocardial cushions from the septum, aorticopulmonary septum. Here you can see the muscular part and this interventricular foramen, what I told you, which is closed by the cushion. Let's see this in the movie. Here you can see the growing of the muscular part, of course, parallelly the separation of the atrium. This is the muscular interventricular septum. And here you can see we have one small foramen between the ventricles. This is the primary interventricular foramen, which we close by later, finally, in the last step of the development. It is really important to mention that for the development, for the division of the outflow part of the ventricles and for the division of this aorticopulmonary trunk, we need other endocardial cushions. And into these cushions will migrate from the secondary heart field the neurocrest cells. Here you can see the migration of the neurocrest cells through the pharyngeal arches. And here you can see the neurocrest cells. They are located there at the level of the bulbus cordis, outflow part of the ventricles, and the truncus arteriosus. Here you can see these cells there in the outflow part. And also I mentioned that these neurocrest cells, they are involved in the development of the cranial portion too. So that's why if you have a patient with abnormality of the face, always you have to thinking about the possible abnormality of the development of the heart. One of the most known syndrome is the DiGeorge syndrome, where the malformation of the head and neck will combine with the malformation of the heart. Let's see now this picture about the septum formation of the conus cordis and the truncus arteriosus. There you can see the atrioventricular orifice. We separated that to a right and the left atrioventricular canal. Here you can see the right ventricle, and there, this is the left ventricle. Between them, we start to separate the ventricles with the muscular part of the interventricular septum. There, upward, you can see the other parts of the bulbus cordis. The proximal outflow region, it was from the conus cordis, the proximal outflow part of the ventricle. And after you can see the distal outflow part, this is the truncus arteriosus. From here we'll develop the aorta and the pulmonary trunk if we can separate it from each other. How can we do that? Here you can see the steps of the separation of the outflow part of the ventricle and the truncus arteriosus. On the wall, you can see also endocardial cushions within this part. First, we have one in the right upper part, and we have a left there in the lower portion. And these cushions, they will grow downward, this one to the left, this one to the right. And during the development, as you see, these cushions, they will form a spiral shape, because there the blood flow, which will originate from the atrioventricular orifice, it will have a spiral shape, and that's why will help in the formation, in the spiral shape formation of this septum. So here you can see the blood flow from the right atrioventricular orifice, it will go like this to the pulmonary trunk, and from the left atrioventricular orifice, here you can see the other to the aorta. Let's see the picture again. So from the left one, we will go like this towards the aorta. From the right atrioventricular opening, we will go, this is a spiral shape, 270 is the degree of the rotation of the septum. We are going to the pulmonary trunk. Here you can see it there in the heart too, and the position of these vessels. You can see that they go around each other because of this special septum formation between them. From the anterolateral portion of the outflow tract, here will be, from the right ventricle will originate the pulmonary trunk, and from the posteromedial portion or outflow tract will go to the aorta. So here you can see this very special spiral orientation of the septum. And finally, of course, here in the distal part, we have also swellings in the distal part. We have to separate from each other the aorta and the pulmonary trunk with this aorticopulmonary septum, and this is the way how we can completely separate the aorta from the pulmonary trunk. And so this is the upper part of this septum, the middle part of this septum. I told you that the lower part of this septum, it will be really important for the closure of the interventricular septum. This will form the upper membranous part of the interventricular septum. Here you can see the membranous portion of the interventricular septum. From the right side anteriorly and left side posteriorly, we have these cushions, and also we have one inferior. These are which will close the interventricular septum, and we have no communication between the right and the left side at all. Let's see this in the video. Here you can see the migration of the neurocrest cells from the secondary heart field. And they will go to the outflow part of the heart tube. They will form the endocardial cushions there in the outflow portion and in the truncus arteriosus. Here you can see the neurocrest cells. If you see the outflow tract, this is the bulbus cordis. This is here the right ventricle and the left ventricle. The right atrioventricular orifice, the left atrioventricular orifice, you can see it. And the position of the two cushions, one right up, the other downward. In the left side, this is the position of the cushions during the development, and you can see the rotation of it, how the blood flow can orientate the growing of these ridges. And finally, we have a spiral septum, and you see it very well that the lower part of the septum will grow, and also the upper part of it. Because of the spiral shape of this septum, you see this orientation of the vessels. What we have to complete with the septum from the upper part at the distal outflow part of the bulbus cordis. And finally, I would like to tell you some words about the development of the semilunar valves, which are located there in the outflow part, the proximal part of the aorta, and the pulmonary trunk. Here you can see these endocardial cushions there, which are located at the orifice. First, in the truncus arteriosus, we have a common opening like this, a common cross-section. And you see that we have two cushions. We have an anterior ventrally anterior, we have dorsally a posterior, and we have one and two sides, right and left. And these, they will fuse, and they will separate from each other the two orifices, the atrial, the aorta, and the pulmonary trunk. Here you can see, dorsally we can see the aorta. Here you can see also the rotation of these structures too. And because we have a fusion there, that's why I think you can understand the position of the leaflets of the different valves. In the pulmonary trunk, we have an anterior one, and posteriorly a right and a left. And in the aorta, we have anteriorly a right and a left, and one posterior leaflet. And I hope you know very well that from the right and the left sinus, aortic sinus, will originate the main vessels, the coronary vessels of the heart. Here you can see the anatomical position of it. This is the aorta, the right, left, and posterior. Here you can see the origin of the right coronary and the origin of the left coronary artery. And there you can see the semilunar valve of the pulmonary trunk with an anterior valve and right and the left posteriorly. Here you can see the orientation of it. And how we form this semilunar shaped valve. Again, the blood flow will hollow the wall of this whole outflow part and will form this packet-shaped semilunar valve. Let's see this at the end. Here is the outflow part. There you can see the endocardial cushions. The blood flow will hollow out this one. We have posteriorly, ventrally, and two lateral cushions. They will fuse. They separate from each other the pulmonary trunk and the aorta. They will rotate because of the spiral shape of the septum, and this is the final position of the semilunar valves. And the blood flow will hollow the wall and will form this special shape of the semilunar valves, which has a tense part and flexed part. We saw it in the anatomy practice. And this is the end of the whole separation. You can see the lower part of the septum will grow and will separate from each other the right ventricle from the left ventricle. And this is the end of the whole developmental movie. And finally, I would like to tell you only just some words about the malformations. Here you can see the different malformations of the interventricular septum. One of the most frequent malformations is the interventricular septum defect, when the membranous part does not form. Here you can see that. It is the most frequent developmental malformation. The other symptom, the follow-tetralogy, it is that what you have to know very well. Here in this tetralogy, of course, we have four main symptoms. What are those? The first is the stenosis of the pulmonary trunk. That's why we have an enlargement in the right side, right ventricle, the hypertrophy of the right ventricle. You can see also, of course, an interventricular septum defect, and the position of the aorta, it's not normal, it's located above the septum. That's why we say overriding aorta. These are the four main symptoms of the follow-tetralogy, what we have to know in the exam. If you see this malformation, there is missing the septum. This is called the persistent truncus arteriosus. We did not divide the pulmonary trunk from the aorta. And this is another malformation when this rotation, this spiral form is not complete. So that's why the aorta is originated from the right ventricle and the pulmonary trunk will originate from the left ventricle. This is called the transposition of the great vessels. And of course, we could have problem with the different valves. Here you can see the stenosis, the atresia of the pulmonary valve. In this case, the blood flow will communicate with the pulmonary vessels through the ligamentum arteriosum of Botolli. This is called the pulmonary valvular atresia. And if you have closure or atresia of the aortic valve, it is a very severe case because it means that the deoxygenated blood will go through the whole body. These are the blue babies. Here you can see the deoxygenated blood is mixed in the heart. And also we can talk about tricuspid valve atresia too. So all of the valves we could have problems with all of the valves during the development. And finally, I would like to mention only just one genetical malformation, which is the Held-Oram syndrome. Why is it important to know that? I mentioned at the beginning that there are a lot of genes which are involved in the development of the heart, but those genes, these are also involved in the development of other structures. For example, in case of the TBX gene, it is also involved in the development of the extremities. So in this syndrome, this patient has problem with the development of the upper extremity and the heart too. And finally, this is the case a few years ago, when you can see that unfortunately here we have no complete development of the anterior wall, body wall. This is called the ectopia cordis. This cute girl born in this special malformation, but fortunately she's happy now. They made a very special helmet to protect the heart, to form an artificial sternum in front of it. So please know about this malformation too. It's not so frequent, fortunately, but we have to know it. And finally, I would like to thank you for your attention, and I hope that you can learn the development of the heart from these videos. Thank you so much.